I'm Laura London, and this is a special video edition of Speaking of Jung. Joining us today for episode 123 is Jungian analyst and publisher Dr. Robert Hinshaw in Einsiedeln, Switzerland. He graduated from Northwestern University, trained as a Jungian analyst at the Jung Institute, Zurich, and received a doctorate in psychology from the University of Zürich. While a student in Switzerland, he worked at James Hillman's Spring House, where he helped publish the Spring Journal and later co-founded the publishing house Daimon Verlag. For 45 years, he has been publishing the work of Jungian analysts, as well as the yearly Eranos yearbook and the IAAP Congress proceedings. He is the literary executor for Aniela Jaffé, which has made possible the new book, just published by Daimon, titled Reflections on the Life and Dreams of C.G. Jung, which is the subject of our talk today. Dr. Hinshaw has worked as a training analyst, supervisor, and faculty member at the C.G. Jung Institute in Kusnacht, and is in private practice both remotely and in Zurich in the very building that housed the original C.G. Jung Institute and where the Psychology Club remains to this day. Please visit our website, speakingofjung.com, where you will find links to everything discussed in this episode in the show notes. This video interview is being recorded on Sunday, August 13th, 2023, through the magic of StreamYard. Hi, Dr. Hinshaw. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you and I actually met in person during my one visit to Zurich back in 2015. And we spent some time together in Einsiedeln, that beautiful town, in your office, your Daimon Verlag office, and then in your office in the Psychology Club. So I'd like to bring in our slides that we're going to share with the listeners today. And we have a lot of photos to share with everybody. And you are here to, first of all, talk about this new book that Daimon has published titled Reflections on the Life and Dreams of C.G. Jung by Aniela Jaffé from Conversations with Jung. But let's start at the beginning. This is a photograph that you took of the original C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich. It's on Gemeindestrasse. And when you sent me this photo, I remembered that I actually have a postcard, the postcard that you had printed of this photo.
Well, that's an interesting story because I used to be a photographer. And when I first came as a young student, I always had my little camera with me. And I took this picture of the Institute. So this was 1971 or 72. And I showed it to the secretary at the Institute at the time, Marty Büchler. And she suggested, why don't you make postcards? There's so many people who would love to have a copy of this. And I happened to be living I had a room with a photographer family, the Hofstetters at Kreuzlingen, very close to the Institute. So I had the dark room, and I printed up a whole bunch of postcard-sized copies, and then they sold them at the Institute for many years. Mm-hmm. So there are a few of them around.
So that's the building where they started the original Institute in 1948, and it looks a little different today, right?
Well, the building itself is the same shape, the same structure and everything, but the vines have been removed, and it's maybe a little brighter and more sparkly because in 2016, it was the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the club. The building belongs to the Psychology Club of Zurich. That was started in 1916 by Jung and several friends. And for the celebrations, they kind of spiffed it up. But basically, it's still the same. Hasn't changed that much.
Mm-hmm. So the Psychology Club is still there today. And you have an office upstairs where you have an analytic practice.
That's right. If you look at the top floor, that sort of middle window, there's two sort of alcoves and a bigger central area. That's the window to my office on the top floor. No elevator. So one
Right.
has to keep in shape to come for sessions, and I go up and down several times per day.
Right. It's a really beautiful building. I'm so happy that I got to see it. And today, the Jung Institute is located in Kusnacht, the town where Jung lived and worked. And this is a photo of the Jung Institute today, where you also work, right?
That's right. I'm on the admissions committee, so I interview people who are applying to come as wanting to study together with several others.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we have classes there. We have meetings there, and so forth. It's still a very active institute to this day,
Mm-hmm.
and still very international.
And it's on the lake, on Lake Zurich, right?
Yes, it's just about maybe 400 or 500 meters from Jung's house, so just slightly north of where Jung's house is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a building that belongs to the community of Kusnacht. And,
this building, yeah.
This building here, so we rent it as an institute.
Mm-hmm.
And they offered it in 1980. They said, this is a building that we own, and it's available if you'd like to move here. And Dr. Adolf Guggenbühl-Craig was curatorium president at the time. And he and the curatorium made the decision to move there, which was very controversial because people loved the old institute in the Psychology Club building,
yeah,
Gemeindestrasse. But it was way too small for the institute. It was really just one floor. The lecture hall really only comfortably seated about 30 or 40 people. And so it was
mm-hmm.
standing room only when a popular speaker would be there.
Mm-hmm.
The library was very small, and so forth. And here was an opportunity to go to a much bigger building, to be in the community where Jung had lived and worked, as you said. Yeah. And much more. There's a beautiful big lecture hall there now, and the library is still way too small, but much bigger than the other one was. Mm-hmm. But there's plenty of room for the people who work there. There's a picture archives. There's a student room, kind of a lounge, and so forth and so on. It's just a much better space. So in the end, I have no doubt that it was the right decision when we decided to move, but an unpopular one in the first moments.
Mm-hmm. So this is the current C.G. Jung Institute, and then the building that we showed in the previous slide is the Psychology Club.
That's
and right. That brings us to your publishing company that you co-founded, Daimon Verlag. And I took this photo when I visited you back in 2015. And this is the archive room.
Yes, it's a very old building. I think 700 years old or something like that. You wouldn't think it when you look at it, but because it's been renovated a few times. But we're extremely lucky to have the top floor of this building. So, and we have four big rooms in a big hallway and a kitchen and so forth. So it's a very comfortable place to work and to be. This particular picture is of the archive room, where we keep manuscripts and old books, and where we can do editorial work and that sort of thing. And the nice thing is we have a fantastic view. We're right across the Klosterplatz from the Benedictine Abbey.
Yeah, we're going to show pictures here in a second of the Abbey. Yeah, I took a photo of you showing me the Eranos yearbooks. You published the yearly yearbook from the Eranos conferences, and been doing that since the 90s.
Conferences go on to this day, and in their statutes, they're required to do a yearbook of each one. So all of the lectures that are given each year are published then in a yearbook, which we've been doing since the early 90s is when we sort of took over the publishing task. And we distribute all of the yearbooks, including the older ones, going all the way back to 1933 when Eranos first started.
And you ship worldwide, don't you? These are all available directly from Daimon Verlag. There will be a link in the show notes.
Yeah, they're available, but I have to warn you that the shipping costs have gone up so much now that the shipping costs more than the book sometimes.
Okay, so I think some of them may be available on Amazon.
Yes, I think so. I'm quite sure they would be.
Okay, I'll find a link to that.
You can also still get books from Eranos directly, but we officially have it on our website, and we distribute the books when there's a request.
And Daimon Verlag's website is daimon.ch, daimon.ch. I just snapped a couple of these photos when I was there visiting you, and this is again 2015.
A while ago.
Yeah, a little bit ago, but it was a great day, and I loved seeing the town. And as you mentioned, one of the things that was, speechless, that this is the Benedictine Abbey that houses the Black Madonna of Einsiedeln. I did an episode about it with Jungian analyst, the late Jungian analyst, Fred Gustafson. That's episode 10. Because as I was walking out the door, you handed me his book about the Black Madonna. And you suggested that I get in touch with him when I got back to the US, and I did. But this is from the window, right, of your office.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
I originally had my photo in here, but your photo is much better, so I replaced it.
Oh,
it's breathtaking.
And one can hardly make a bad photo of this beautiful place, and especially when the full moon is there behind it. Fred Gustafson and I were students together at the Institute back in the 70s. And,
that's right.
And he had done his thesis work on the Black Madonna. And I ran into him at a Congress many years later. I think it was in Barcelona in 2004. And just mentioned to him that my office was right across the street from the monastery. And I valued his book. And he said, well, it's been out of print for many years. And I said, well, would he be interested in possibly having a new edition? He could bring it up to date and make corrections and so forth. And he said, well, no, I'm really very much focused on Native American things now. And so he basically said, no, let's not bother. But about a month later, he wrote to me and said he thought about it. And he really would be very happy to do a new edition, which we then did. And book is available again, and that's what I gave you. I thought it would be interesting for you since you had been there, and I thought Fred might be an interesting person for you to interview.
Yes, and again, that's episode 10 of Speaking of Jung with Fred Gustafson. Here's another one of your photos of the Abbey. This is in the winter, obviously. And here is the Black Madonna. There were no photographs allowed in the Abbey, so I scanned the pamphlet that I took from there, and this is a photograph of her. And as you mentioned, they change her clothing periodically based on the season.
Has 36 outfits, I think.
36 outfits.
Various people over the years have donated these absolutely gorgeous brocaded dresses, and according to the time of the year, the church year, they change the colors. She has green ones and yellow ones and a black one, and each more stunning than the other.
Yeah. And,
I don't know exactly how they determine which ones get used which years, because some I haven't seen for a long time, and then suddenly she's wearing it again. But it's wonderful being right across the square from the monastery. It's a beautiful place to go over and be quiet, just be there, sitting in front of her and being quiet. And sometimes one of the monks maybe is playing the organ, or possibly there's a mass going on up in the front part of the church. It's just a wonderful place to live and a wonderful place to work. Being there in Einsiedeln.
Yeah, and Jung actually lectured here. It's the birthplace of Paracelsus, and that's where he delivered those lectures.
That's correct. It's the birthplace of Paracelsus, a little bit outside of town. The alchemist and healer who worked so much with nature and with natural remedies and so forth. And one of the centenaries of his birth, Jung was invited to come and give a lecture, and he ended up coming a second time too. I think it was in 1941 and 1943 that he came and gave lectures in the great hall of the monastery, both of which are published in the collected works. So that brings us to why we're here today.
which is to discuss the new book that was just released in English, was published this year. Was it earlier this year, published in German?
2 years ago, actually, in German.
2 years ago.
Quite a while to get things into shape for the English edition.
For the English edition, it is titled Reflections on the Life and Dreams of C.G. Jung by Aniela Jaffé from Conversations with Jung. And this is the full book jacket. And I mean, where should we begin? This is the actual book that I have. It's a beautiful hardcover book, and it's printed on exquisite paper. There are photos throughout, which we're actually going to show you here today. And it is made up of several parts, this book. There is a preface, which you've written, an introduction by Mrs. Jaffé, and the historical commentary at the back of the book by Elena Fischli.
That's correct.
So tell us about the book.
What I think is particularly relevant is, I was just thinking before we started today that your podcast is called Speaking of Jung, and the material in this book is Jung speaking of Jung. It really is him talking about his life, thoughts, reflections, dreams, and so forth with Aniela Jaffé. And she, of course, took notes during their conversations, which lasted for 4 or 5 years, more or less 1956 to 61, during parts of those years on a regular basis. And, well, what it is him talking about his life, and as I said, those various other things. And then she used that material, her raw material from her shorthand notes, to put together memories, dreams, reflections. But she didn't use all of the material. She used maybe 2/3 of it. There were some things that were blocked either by the publisher or some objections from others, from the Jung family. But there was material that didn't make it into memories, dreams, reflections. And so she always thought the rest of this material is important. And Jung actually trusted me to publish it. It was his wish that his story be told. And so she started to put together a manuscript after Memories, Dreams, Reflections came out, of kind of a second volume. It's not as much material. It's only maybe about half as much, but there are beautiful vignettes and reflections that are in this book that didn't make it into Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And rather than organize it chronologically like Memories, Dreams, Reflections is, she picked 4 main themes, and she put the material more or less into those 4 sections. Would you like me to say what the sections are?
Yes, please.
Okay, so part of it is on personality and life experience. That's and it's a lot of short pieces. Some are only 2 pages, some are maybe 5 pages, because these were fragments. These were things that were left over, but they're beautiful. And some examples of this first section: accepting what life presents me with. On my mother's second voice. Memories of the Jung Einstein. He didn't like talking about the people he had met. He said those were outer events, and what was really important to me were the inner events and how I experienced them. But he was pushed, Aniela Jaffé was also pushed by Kurt Wolff, the American publisher, to get him to talk a little bit about some famous people that he knew quite well, or not fairly well, like Einstein, who did come to his house for dinner several times, and they had conversations. So there's a section on that. There's a chapter on Toni Wolff. A lot of people wondered why she wasn't mentioned more in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And he did talk about her and have some dreams about her that now come in this volume. And then there's a beautiful story about Father Hubertus heals the little elephant at the Circus Knie. Circus Knie is the Swiss National Circus, and they have their headquarters close to Bollingen, where Jung had his tower. And he tells this beautiful story of a baby elephant that gets sick, and how this monk is able to heal the elephant. That's one of my favorite ones. Then if we go to the second section, it's on psychiatric and analytical practice. So he talks more about his work analytically. One chapter is called On Working with Patients Diagnosed with Schizophrenia. or on the phenomenon of suicide, thoughts about suicide and how to work with that with people who are suicidal, and so forth. That's a shorter section. That part is only about 30 pages. And then there's a longer one that's on the here and the beyond, where he talks about life after death, dreams of a post-mortal existence of my mother, further dreams about Tony Wolff and Emma Jung after their deaths, the dead appearing as animals, and so forth. So you see, they're really fascinating themes that he addresses. And we move to the last section, which is human image, God image, and worldview. That's got several chapters, one of which is on the unconsciousness of God. And he talks about theological questions, life after death, and so forth, what his attitudes are towards Christianity. Some of the things that he had already addressed in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, but there's more material here.
There's more
on those. And then what's important in the book is that Elena Fischli, who was working on pulling it all together and preparing it for publication in German, beefing up the footnotes and so forth, she came across more and more material about the story behind the story. We had all the correspondence of Aniela Jaffé with various people, with publishers and so forth, and with Jung during the time that they were having these conversations. And she realized there's much more to the story than what has been told so far. And it needs to be told about all the ways that, especially that Aniela Jaffé was marginalized. They always tried to make it sound like it was the biography written by Jung. And in many of the editions in other languages, for example, her name isn't even mentioned on the cover.
You're talking about Memories, Dreams, Reflections now, which is usually referred to as Jung's autobiography, and that's really not accurate.
Right. I mean, in a certain sense, it is, in that he's talking about himself. It's about his life, but he did not write the book.
Yeah.
Aniela Jaffé is the author, and she made shorthand notes, and then she typed those up from her handwritten notes into the typewritten version, and that's what's called the protocols. And then she worked on the protocols and made them into Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and then later into Reflections on the Life and Dreams of C.G. Jung.
Okay, so let's stop for a minute. So there's several parts to this then. So before Memories, Dreams, Reflections was published, it was altered, right? It was altered to kind of be laid out more like an autobiography.
Well, that was the aim of Kurt Wolff, the American publisher, and the one who actually initiated the whole idea.
Okay.
Yes, he wanted it to. He thought it would sell much better, and I'm sure he was right, if it could be presented as Jung's autobiography. And so he said, do everything you can that that you're out of sight, to Aniela Jaffé, and put it in first person, that have Jung speaking, I remember this, or I dreamt that, or whatever. So it sounds like it's him speaking, which is the way it really was. But of course, she edited that. It's not pure Jung in the sense that it's exactly verbatim. There wasn't an audio recording made. It was her handwritten notes, the way she remembered it.
I'm just curious, was that all of that editing, was that done after Jung passed away? No,
that was done. It went on for 5 years. So she was editing it during the time Jung was alive, and he saw much of it before he died.
Okay.
Things were going back and forth between New York and Zurich, and being cut out. And then there was some pretty heavy-handed editing that was being done in New York. And so both Jung and Jaffé objected to that, and they sometimes were able to put things back in the original form and sometimes not.
Okay. So there was a lot of back and forth as to what to put into Memories and what not.
Yeah, and then how it is presented and titles of chapters and so forth. And that's where the historical commentary by Elena Fischli is so interesting, is because it documents all of that. It might be a bit tedious for somebody who's not really interested, but I find it fascinating. It reads almost like a novel, the way things went back and forth, and to finally get to the version that was published.
Mm-hmm. And the historical commentary is, I mean, it's over 100 pages. It's about 150 pages.
Yes.
It's the last section of the book. And so just to reiterate, this new book is the published notes of Aniela Jaffé, and she very, very much wanted this to be published actually before she died, but it wasn't.
Yes.
And so she
Well,
put
she
it in
tried
your
very,
hands.
there was a lot of disagreement about copyright issues.
Okay.
And so she didn't want to publish it as long as that wasn't clarified.
Sure.
She did make a couple of attempts, and then she realized there's just too much of an objection coming about this copyright question.
Okay.
And so she withdrew it and said we have to wait until the moment is ripe. And then when she was getting older and realized she wouldn't live much longer, and that it wouldn't be published during her lifetime, she asked me to be her literary executor and to take over the responsibility for that and her other writings. And she said, do anything you can to try to get this published when the time is right, when you find a way to do it. So it's been,
and that was in
many years.
Yeah, that was in 86 that she placed the manuscript in your hands, and then she died shortly after in 91. But what I found interesting is that she actually wrote the introduction to this book.
Yes, she had her own version of it, typewritten, all ready to go. I mean, that was before the days of computers. So she had typed everything herself and typed the introduction and, with the footnotes and everything else in an early version. And that was, she had put, I think, one copy in the ETH archives, and she had given a copy to the Jung Institute, and then she gave a copy to me at that point, saying when you can and when the time is right, please do publish it if you can.
So you were able to publish it in German a couple years ago, and that same book was translated. Was translated by Caitlin Stevens into English, and here we are. It was released on July 15th of this year, 2023, and it's available. It's available on Amazon at a discount right now if you use the link in the show notes for this episode. So we would like to share with you the photos that are inside the book. Again, that's just a photo of my copy. And we'll start here at the beginning with the first photo.
Okay, well, this is Aniela Jaffé had a little Leica camera, which is a very good camera, that most of you probably know. And she took some pictures of Jung at Bollingen, which is what this is. You can see it's really sharp. It really shows him just being himself, sitting there next to the wall. And there are 3 or 4 other photos that we'll be seeing that she also took, which are quite well known. This one is not so well known, but there's a couple of others that have been used many times for book covers and so forth. Yes, this is another one of hers where he's cutting the wood. Everything was done by hand at Bollingen. They didn't have electricity. There was no running water. So they had to keep fires going, boil the water, do the cooking. And Jung was hands-on. I mean, that was his way of being close with nature. He cut his own wood, built his own fires, cooked his own food.
I think about that a lot. It inspires me to stay connected to nature. And I love the way he dressed. I mean, he's not wearing, a t-shirt and shorts. He's got the jacket on. I love that. I love that. And then here he is with the stone that he carved.
This is one of my favorites. Yes, also made by Aniela Jaffé.
She took this.
Yes, she took all 3 of the ones that we've just seen. And he's there sitting in the chair. The chair is still there at the tower. The family still uses the tower for vacations and so forth. And once in a while, a tour is allowed to come in and visit. But this is the famous orphan stone that he carved. With one of the stones from the quarry across the lake that provided all of the other stones for building the towers. And you can see he's got his pipe, he's relaxed, he's reading. that
He's
was the
got the
kind of
jacket
picture
on.
that maybe most people didn't get of him, but because she was there with him so much, she was able to catch him kind of in these moments.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. She was very close to him. She was his private secretary, but
Yeah.
let's give a little background as to how she met him and got to know him, and how she got so close to him. How did that
Okay.
happen?
This is all documented in the historical commentary, but I'll just
Yes.
sort of do a sketch of it. She was a refugee. She was a Jewish refugee during the Holocaust to Switzerland, and had a Swiss husband for a while at the beginning, and that was in Geneva. And when she came to Zurich, she was having a lot of doubts and of course sorrows with the war going on, and worried about her family and what was going to happen to the world and so forth and so on, like many people were. And she went into analysis with Liliana Frey-Rohn, who was another prominent Jungian analyst, and now
Yeah, I think we have her here.
And one of our authors. She wrote the book From Freud to Jung, which we published. Yes, there she's on the right in this picture. This is them at Bollingen. And she also wrote a book about Nietzsche. She attended all of Jung's Nietzsche seminars on Zarathustra, and she wrote a kind of a psychobiography of Nietzsche. At any rate, Aniela Jaffé was working with Liliana Frey in analysis, and she was bringing these prolific dreams. And Liliana Frey kept thinking, I can go as far as I can go with her, but my capacities are limited. And she talked with Jung about it, and Jung said, well, send her to me. And so Aniela Jaffé was sent on to Jung with some of these dreams, and he was very taken by her and the dreams. And he encouraged her to continue. She had almost no money at that time. She was working as a secretary for professors at the university and so forth to pay her bills. So he said, you don't have to pay for your analysis. Maybe you can help me sometimes with doing research or whatever. And that worked out very well, because she was very well educated. I mean, she had gone to top universities in Germany. She was in med school for a while, and then decided to major in child psychology. And she transferred to the University of Hamburg, and she had written her dissertation and was just about to defend it when the Nazis proclaimed no Jews could be professors, and the professor was fired from one day to the next. And soon she was also kicked out of the university because she refused to give the Hitler salute. So she never got her doctorate, even though she had done all of the work. And this was very useful then when she was working with Jung, because she knew psychology. She was very well educated and could read and edit his material and understand it.
Right.
And that was how they first got to know each other. That was in the early 40s. And then later on, when the Jung Foundation, or the Jung Institute, was founded in 1948, she was chosen to be the first administrator secretary. It was all because it was very small at that time. But this is the old Jung Institute in the Psychology Club building that we found.
Yeah.
And she was, performing that job as a 50% employment, and got to know all the students, and she was teaching herself at times. And that was for 7 years. And then Jung's regular secretary that he'd had for many years ended up resigning because she was getting married and moving away. And he was desperate for a new secretary. And he asked Aniela Jaffé if she would be willing to transfer from the Institute duties to becoming his personal secretary. And she hesitated because, for one thing, she knew she had a task to fulfill at the Institute. Of course, somebody else could do it too, and that's what happened. But she also didn't know if it would be a good idea working with Jung on a daily basis. And she talked with Emma Jung about it, and Emma strongly encouraged her. And she decided she would take the new position after deliberating about it for several weeks.
Mm.
And she started going on a regular basis to work with Jung. Then he had a tremendous amount of correspondence,
Yeah.
as you can see from the small selection of it that's been published. And of course, they got much closer. And Jung warned her at the beginning that part of this job means you have to put up with the tempers, because you can be grouchy sometimes. And she said that definitely was something she had to learn, but she said there were many other aspects which were more than compensated for that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
When they would sit drinking a cup of tea and having a break together and just talking. And he was, of course, a man who was spouting ideas all of the time. And she said the conversations with him during break times were just wonderful. And the work was interesting. He was corresponding, of course, with many very interesting people. And
right.
he trusted her more and more as time went on. And sometimes he would just tell her more or less what to write, and she could write the letters, and he would just check it and sign it. And she had a lot of responsibility then.
Yeah.
So she was kind of the natural choice when it came to when Kurt Wolff came up with the idea of having a biography or an autobiography, whichever we call it. There had been other attempts before. People tried to write biographies, and Jung was never happy about that. He said biographies are full of falsehoods, and autobiographies all the more. I'm definitely never going to write one myself. If somebody else writes it, it's hard for me to imagine. But in the end, he agreed. He said, if it can be Aniela Jaffé, whom I trust and who understands me. And so she, again, hesitated a bit, but then she agreed to take this on with some, what Jung had decided to do was he would have E.A. Bennett, who was a psychiatrist from England, write as a man and as a doctor more about his work, to write a biography at the same time, which is a book that exists. It's not as well known. E.A. Bennett wrote a biography of Jung, and to have Aniela Jaffé then work with him closely, and he would just tell stories and recollect things and tell his dreams and so forth, and she would take the shorthand notes and then put it into a form that could be published. So that's kind of what led up to her being in that very unique position of being the biographer of Jung. Mm-hmm. Of course, she took a lot of flack for that too, because many people were jealous. Sure. Imagine in the schools in Zurich, there were many people all vying for Jung's attention, and very confident people, and they each had their roles to play. But she then had this very central role of being his authorized biographer, you could say. Mm-hmm.
And she later practiced as a Jungian analyst herself, and she was analyzed by Jung. She was in analysis with him.
Yes. After Liliana Frey, those early sessions, she then analyzed with Jung for a long time, and became an analyst herself. Mm-hmm. And she had her own practice right up until the end.
Right up until the end. So I had shown a few of the early photos that are in the book.
Yes, this is her as a young girl in Berlin. She grew up in Berlin in a very well-to-do arts-related family. There's a lot of detail about that in the historical commentary, so I won't go into too much detail now. She liked to have fun too. I mean, she was a very serious, scholarly person, but I like this picture because it shows her playing the accordion. I don't know the story behind it. I don't know exactly where she was or what she was doing.
Yeah, in the snow with short sleeves. That's so interesting. Yes. It's beautiful. And then is this at Eranos or Bollingen?
I'm not sure where that is, but it could very likely be at Eranos. That would be my guess. Mm-hmm. This is definitely at Eranos. They're sitting on the wall. The wall is outside of the lecture hall. And Jung lectured there. There's Liliana Frey on the left and Aniela Jaffé on the right, with Jung also at Eranos at the wall. I was going to say Jung, of course, was a part of Eranos from the beginning and gave many, many lectures right up until the early 50s was his last one. And she, of course, went in the years after she got to know him. She often went along. She had stories to tell about how the caravan of Jungians from Zurich would drive over the Alps. That was before the tunnels were built. And so it was a long trip of many hours to get down to Ascona, to the Italian part of Switzerland, for these conferences. And that was a high point of the year, was there, because Jung was at his best, and there were many other very interesting speakers. They would bring together speakers from many different fields. So it was a multidisciplinary conference at a time when that wasn't really popular.
Yeah.
These days, it's something that happens quite often, but in those days, it was extremely unusual. And Olga Fröbe, the founder of Eranos, really was kind of a pioneer in that. And after Jung died, and that first generation of speakers was pretty much gone, Aniela Jaffé herself was invited to become an Eranos speaker, and she actually gave 4 lectures herself over the course of about a 10-year period at Eranos. There's that picture we saw before and here's another one with the two of them sitting on the wall, and Liliana Frey to the right in the other picture. So she and Liliana Frey became quite close friends. They lived very close to each other on the Zurich Berg. And right up until the day that Liliana Frey died, which was a few months before Aniela died, they were close friends and staying in touch and going over to each other's apartments for tea and that sort of thing, as well as both being active members of the psychology club.
Then we come to this photo of Jung just kicking back.
Yeah, this is at Bollingen again, and another picture made by Aniela Jaffé. And you could see the wine is on the table. He loved his wine, but he always had a book there or a manuscript or something to be working on.
Yep, got his feet up.
I like this picture because I think it shows her depth in a way. You see, she was a very deep person, and she experienced a lot of sorrow in her life.
Yeah.
First and foremost, the Holocaust and the loss of a lot of friends and some family through that, and her family being dispersed all over different parts of the world. One sister ended up in London, which is where her parents also finally emigrated to with her help. That story is also told.
After many years of staying
another
behind.
Another sister, her youngest sister, married quite a famous orchestra conductor and ended up living in New York City. But yes, she saw a lot of sorrow in her life, and you can see in this picture she's a little bit melancholy.
Yeah.
This was given as an example of how when other editions of the book came out, they pretty much eradicated her from it. Aniela Jaffé is just not even mentioned. It's C.G. Jung, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And part of the idea of bringing this book out now with, of course, Jung and his anecdotes and stories, but the historical commentary is to kind of rehabilitate Aniela Jaffé and to show how she really was kind of pushed out of the picture, even though she was the one who actually wrote the book, and it wouldn't exist without her. It's really important that people realize the role that she played, and how she was omitted, as in this picture. And there are many other examples where there are covers of Memories, Dreams, Reflections without any mention of the author of the book. This is the French version. She's mentioned there, but in small print on the same line as the translator. Both translators. Yeah, this is another one of the fun ones. She didn't travel that much, but here she is riding a camel in the desert. She did make a trip to Israel, which she almost never talked about or wrote about, but we found in her papers that she'd actually made a trip to Israel, and it was very, very meaningful for her when she went there.
And this is her in Egypt, right?
Yes. I don't know any of the background because, again, it's a photograph that we found.
Oh, okay.
She gave to me. It's not one that she told me about, but it was in her paper. She just had a few personal photographs that she had kept. This is a picture taken by her nephew, Frank Herman. Her sister in England had two sons, Frank and Luke Herman,
Okay.
who I later became friends with, and they helped a lot with family history. And this is a picture that Frank made one time visiting. They would come at least once a year to Zurich, usually the two of them together, and visit her in her little apartment on the Zurich Berg. And I like this picture. It shows her maybe when she's, in her, I think, early 60s. And having a happy moment because she's there with her family, a little bit of her family that was left. This is a picture that I made her on her balcony just a couple of years before she died. But you can see she still has the bright eyes. She still has an alertness. She was alert right up until the end.
So I think this might be the last photo. No, we have a couple more. We have a few more. Yes, this is the one with her.
This is her. Another thing that I should mention is that she was almost totally blind. The last years of her life, her eyesight deteriorated greatly. And she had to use a magnifying glass to be able to read at all. And you see what she has in her hand there. I have it here. She called it her Turmchen, which means little tower.
Okay, you froze up. You froze up a little. Would you hold that up again?
Yes, I'll put it up.
You have it right there. There it is. Yeah.
I treasure that, and I use it myself now. But, she would always bring out her Turmchen, and when she needed to read something, she wanted to keep reading to the end, and it was a lot of work to read. So she sometimes, what she was doing was she was hiring students from the university to come and read to her. And that proved to be doubly valuable because not only could she go back and revisit maybe things that Jung had written or that other people had written that she wanted to reread or to hear again, sort of like audiobooks, before audiobooks started becoming popular. And she sort of became friends with these people who were her readers. They were these young students, and they got really interested in her. And she could tell them about, Jungian psychology, and maybe talk with them about their dreams and so forth. And she had a real rapport with these young students, which she would really be happy when she would tell me about the sessions that she had with them. Yeah, there she is, very close to the end, just shortly before she died. So she's probably about 87, 88 years old at that picture. That next one then is her sitting in the backyard of Jung's house.
Yes.
I don't know the story behind it, but I would guess that it was probably maybe around the time that Jung died. Maybe this is after he died, just before he died. You can see it's fall. There's lots of leaves. She's very well dressed with a hat and a long coat. And this, another of those pictures that we found is, I'm 90% sure that this is her at the Jung Institute. During her years typing there, you see she has a big old manual typewriter. And the kind of door, the kind of walls and so forth mean that it's probably the Jung Institute, although it could possibly be at Jung's house also. I'm not completely sure. But, she earned her living for many years before she became an analyst and an author and so forth by being a secretary. She worked for various professors at the university. She had also worked at the Children's Hospital. She had worked at various places where she could have contact with children because she still loved that kind of work. And as I mentioned before, she was interested in children's psychology.
And she wrote several books herself.
She wrote a number of books herself. Do you have a list of those there? Like Word and Image is one of her best known books.
Word and Image is something, is a book that I've spoken about a lot on this podcast, especially in the beginning, because it was my introduction to Jung. It was the first book that I picked up and bought and read and loved, and then bought several other copies of it. She edited that book, sometimes referred to as the picture book. And she also read, when you and I were speaking earlier, you said that your introduction to Jung was Man and His Symbols.
That's right.
And
So
she wrote,
that she wrote one of the 5 essays in there. It was the last thing that
Mhm.
Jung wrote before he died. Was
Mhm.
It came after he had those BBC interviews, and he realized he needed to write something that a broader public could understand. So he tried to write a kind of a summary, an introductory summary of his psychology, and then 4 of his closest associates each wrote an essay. So Aniela Jaffé and Joseph Henderson and Yolanda Jacobi and Marie-Louise von Franz each wrote an essay in that book, which I think it was only published after Jung died, but it was kind of his last piece.
Mhm.
The way that Word and Image came to be, the book that you said was your introduction, and was
Yeah.
For many people, for Jung's 100th birthday, they had a big exhibition in Zurich at the Helm House, where they sort of said 100 years of Jung's, prominent Swiss citizen and so forth, and they had photographs and stories and vignettes of his life and so forth.
Mm.
And a number of people approached her afterwards and said, couldn't this be made into a book?
Yeah.
The exhibit, disappears, but is only temporary.
Right.
And so she took that material and then wrote some additional text to go with it. And it is the picture book, as you say, because it has beautiful pictures from Eranos, from Bollingen, from the Psychology Club, and so forth. Kind of Jung's world, you could say, and then with some text to back up the pictures.
And some unpublished letters are in that book, and some photos that had never been published before.
Mm-hmm. But she wrote several other books too, and the one I asked her towards the end of her life what she felt was her most important book, and she said, well, The Myth of Meaning, entitled The Myth of Meaning. Do I have it here? Yes, I can just quickly hold it up.
Yeah.
The Myth of Meaning.
Yep, there it is. I remember I tweeted from that book.
In the Myth of Meaning in the work of C.G. Jung, and it's probably her deepest book, and it's very much herself writing, but of course it's about Jung and his work, and this whole idea of finding meaning in our lives. That's what makes life worth living. But how do we find it? And many people who come into analysis come because they don't find meaning in their lives.
Yep.
And what can be done about that? How can one find one's own meaning, one's own myth, one's own story?
Yeah.
So she wrote that book, and she wrote another quite well-known book on death, dreams, and ghosts.
That's right. That was Jung wrote the introduction to that, I think.
Yes, he did, because he originally was asked to write the book. It was one of the Swiss National Radio had collected people's stories about ghosts and death dreams and so forth. They'd done this huge survey, and they had all this material, a massive material, and they sent it to Jung and asked if he would please comment on it and maybe make a book out of it. And he said, absolutely not. I have no time for this. And he asked Aniela Jaffé if she would do it. And,
not because, sorry to interrupt you, not because of the subject matter, but just because he didn't have the time.
Yeah, he was overwhelmed with work. I mean, this was late in his life when he was, getting old, and he had so many things he still wanted to do, and didn't have the time or the strength to get to them. And she valiantly agreed to do it. I mean, it was a big job sorting through all of that material, but it was fascinating material, and she wrote this really interesting book. I mean, so that's another of the, major things that she did. She made let's see. There's this other book called From the Life and Work of C.G. Jung, which it's a collection of essays. Jung's last years, that was from a lecture she had given at Eranos. Parapsychology, creative phases in Jung's life, alchemy, and then C.G. Jung and National Socialism. I mean, he's, as most of you probably know, he sometimes is accused of being anti-Semitic, and she said she needed to really address that issue. She, as a Jewish woman who knew Jung really well and knew his work, and she takes through all of the various arguments, the accusations that were raised, and which ones have merit and which ones don't, and what her personal experience was, and deals with that whole issue in an in-depth way. So that was another very valuable contribution that I think she made.
Mm-hmm. Again, the title of that book is From the Life and Work of C.G. Jung. I will provide a link to it in the show notes. And so those four are hers, and now this one.
Well, she has other things too. I mean, she made contributions to other
Sure.
books. For example, this book, unfortunately, is not out in English yet, but
Okay.
Im Umkreis des Todes, that means concerning death. And it's an essay that she wrote, as well as one that Mara-Louise von Franz wrote, and one that Liliana Frey-Rohn wrote. So 3 different essays on the topic of death as older women who were facing, the end of their own lives.
And did you publish that?
Yes, it's published by Daimon in German. We haven't got it out in English yet. There have been various
I
things
think there would be, a lot of interest for that in English.
Yeah, that's on definitely in focus, and it's coming, but it might take another year or two before we finally get it out.
Sure.
There are always many parallel projects going on, at the same time, and we right now, for example, we're having a whole bunch of things. Some were delayed and some were sped up, and so suddenly we have way too many things on the table all at once. And when that happens, some things have to be put on the back burner.
So I've added this to I think this is our last slide. This is a new book, right? That's in the works?
Yes. When we started Daimon, our main focus was Jungian history. Books that were going out of print, things about Jungiana, about the history of Jungian psychology, and books by the first generation Jungians. And that still is a big part of our program. So this is a book written by Andreas Schweitzer, who was a Jungian analyst and was president of the Psychology Club in Zurich for many, many years until last year. And he was given a whole cache of letters by a relative of this woman, Hedy Wies, who had been in analysis with Jung for many years. She was a painter herself, an artist, not a famous one, but she painted some very impressive pictures, some of which are reproduced in the book. And what Andreas Schweitzer has done is he's gone through the letters had never been published before, and they're now published for the first time in this book. And he sort of tells the whole story chronologically of this relationship between Jung and Hedy Wies, and Jung talks about a lot of important things, not just personal things between the two of them, but more on an archetypal level. So I think it's a very valuable book, and it's also a continuation of bringing out some of this Jungian history that there's still so much that has never been published.
Yeah, and this is out now.
Direction. It's at the printers right now.
Okay.
So in September, it's officially going to be released.
Okay, I will keep the listeners up to date and include...
I thought I would just mention that to show that the history goes on, and at the same time, we live in today's world, and we are publishing a lot of books by contemporary Jungian analysts as well. Yep. We've done several books by Anne Ulanoff in New York, including her latest one, which was about what was going on during COVID, how she coped and how she reflected and so forth during the COVID period. And then Renate Daniel, we have 3 books of hers, one on nightmares and another on Psyche and Soma. Renate Daniel has been the director of programs at the Jung Institute for, I think, 12 or 13 years, and she's just retired this summer from that position. But she's also a prolific author, so we've been publishing her work. And Tess Castleman with her work with dreams and groups, very contemporary, and so forth. I could go through a long list, but I just wanted to show that, in order to mention that we have a balance between contemporary things that are being written about analysts working today, as well as continuing with the Jungian history whenever.
Yeah. Well, the history is very important, and I like to go straight to the source. I don't go to people who didn't know Jung or train with anyone that knew Jung. I like to go straight to the source, and so you can't get any closer to the source than this new book. So again, it is titled, I'm going to bring it up here, Reflections on the Life and Dreams of C.G. Jung by Aniela Jaffé from Conversations with Jung. And I would like to ask you one more thing about the protocols that are set to be published by Princeton University Press, and it's a project of the Hillman Foundation, and it
Yes,
was titled The Protocols for Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Would you kind of clear that up on the differences and how that's
yeah,
coming along?
that's very important. What the protocols are, that's the name that's been given to Aniela Jaffé's original notes.
Okay.
As I mentioned, from her conversations with Jung during those 5 years, from 56 until 61, she had her own sort of system of shorthand. It wasn't the official version of shorthand, the professional kind. She said she developed her own system of shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
And she would have her little notepads and she would take notes as they spoke. And then she would go home at the end of the day and type those up.
Okay.
Sometimes it would end up being the next day, or in a couple of cases, even maybe a week or two later. But whenever possible, she would do it as soon as possible so that her memory was still fresh. And so she would put it in her typewriter and have a typed version, and she would make carbon copies of those. These are what's called the protocols. So it's not verbatim Jung, but it's very close. It's her short notes being put into words, and so a lot of times not complete sentences and sort of a thing, just
Right.
fragments, you could say. And then she worked on those. She went through various stages. And what she sent to the publisher in New York then was the typed up version, still not, put in the form of a book like Memories, Dreams, Reflections, but
Okay.
it was the basis material. And she would send those on a regular basis to Kurt Wolff at Pantheon, in the New York publishing house. And she kept her own and worked those further, and then she destroyed her own. She didn't think there was any reason to keep them. So we don't have, the original handwritten notes at all. And we don't even have her original typed, version from the handwritten notes. But because Kurt Wolff never returned the notes that she sent to New York, even though she requested them,
Mm-hmm.
there was a blessing in that the notes were preserved. And this is material that was used, as I said, to write Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and also to write the second book, the Reflections, that's just coming out now.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of material that didn't make it into either one, some fragments and so forth. And so this corpus that is referred to as the protocols is this kind of raw material that's formed the basis for both books, as well as a little bit more. And this is what is now being worked on by the Hillman Foundation, and specifically Sonu Shamdasani. He's the official editor. And he's been working through that material and adding commentary and footnotes and so forth. And I think it's a little bit like the black books to the red book, Jung had several black books.
Right.
And that was kind of his raw version. And then he sort of took the gems out of it, or took the nuggets, whatever you want to call it, the things that he thought were most important, and painted the pictures and so forth, and made the red book.
Yep.
This was the raw material that Aniela Jaffé had, from which Memories, Dreams, Reflections was made, and Reflections was made. But it's fascinating to look at it before it was refined, before it was put into sections and sentences, and in one case chronological order and so forth. And so Sonu has been working on this now for a few years.
Yeah.
And the editing process is finished.
Okay.
Thomas Fischer from the Jung family, and I from the Jaffé estate are consulting editors. So we've been following the process and, seeing parts as has worked on them. And that process is finished now, and it's in what they call peer review. What Princeton University Press does as a university press is they put out manuscripts and have experts in the field who remain anonymous. I don't know who they are, to look at the material and see if they feel that it's worthy of being published and so forth. And that can take several months or even up to a year. And that's what's going on right now, and why the book hasn't come out yet. But probably in about 1 year or maximum 2 years, that will be appearing as a Hillman Foundation edition within Princeton University Press, and entitled Protocols, or The Protocols.
So the new book, your new book, Daimon's new book, Reflections, is different from the protocols. The protocols are the raw material, right?
That's right.
And Reflections is more the history of Memory Streams Reflections with the historical commentary added. So that's how they differ.
Yeah, well, it's her refined version. She edited it, and as I said, put it into these 4 main topics, and of course, put it into complete sentences, and polished it like you do when you edit a manuscript. That's what she did, and then the historical commentary comes as the second part of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I just would like to mention that Daimon is, of course, we're a team. None of this would be possible without all of us, pulling on the same rope in the same direction. Ellen officially has been there from the beginning, mainly concentrating on the German program.
Okay.
And Heidi Fessler has been running the office for about 30 years, and she's taking care of the accounts. She's taking care of the timing, the printers, and all of that sort of a thing. And Robert Imhoff, who lives in France, but it's almost daily contact, does all of the formatting, the IT work, and all of the other things that are so essential to publishing books. And it's a great team, and I'm just really grateful to everyone who's a part of it, and that we've been able to keep Daimon going for this long.
Well, we are all grateful to them as well for getting these books out into the world. They're so important. And again, the website is Daimon, DAIMON.ch. And I want to thank you, Dr. Hinshaw, for joining us today, for taking the time, and for sharing your stories and the truth about this book, for sharing it with all of us. We want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Speaking of Jung is made possible by listeners John Temple Jr., Ralph Gotzelman, Eric Hoops, and Doreen Gordon. If you'd like to help keep Speaking of Jung on the air, please visit our support page at speakingofjung.com/support. On our website, you'll find more information on everything discussed in this episode, as well as all of the previous episodes, available to stream or download commercial-free. Speaking of Jung is also available on YouTube podcasts, which you can access by subscribing to this channel, Jungian Laura. It's free. Just click the subscribe button below. Speaking of Jung was created 8 years ago and still exists today because of the generosity of our listeners. All of our content is free to access, but it's not free to produce. Please consider visiting the support page on our website to help keep this podcast alive. I would like to extend birthday greetings to Maria Magdalena de Maria. Thank you for your love and support of this work. With very special thanks to everyone at Daimon Verlag, I'm Laura London, and you've been watching a very special video edition of Speaking of Jung.